My son-in-law stood in the middle of my daughter's hospital room 20 minutes after she had given birth and accused her of carrying another man's child is a day I will never forget as long as I live. I was standing right there. I had just cut the umbilical cord. My hands were still trembling, and he looked at that tiny, perfect baby boy and said, with the kind of cold certainty that only a truly arrogant man can manage, "I want a DNA test. I'm not raising someone else's mistake." My daughter's name is Beverly. She was 31 years old that day. She had been in labor for 19 hours. She hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten. She was lying in that bed at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto with an IV still in her arm, and she looked at her husband with absolute disbelief. The same way you look at someone when you realize, all at once, that you never really knew them at all. I had liked him once. I want to be honest about that. When Beverly first brought him home to our house in Oakville, this would have been about 4 years ago now, I thought he was charming. His name is Marcus. He came from a wealthy family, old money from somewhere outside of Vancouver, and he had that particular ease that people raised with money always seem to have. He shook my husband Bernard's hand firmly. He complimented my cooking. He laughed at the right moments. I remember thinking, well, maybe she's found herself a good one. I should have paid more attention to his mother. Her name is Rosalind, and from the very first dinner we had together, at a restaurant in Yorkville that I'm fairly certain cost more per plate than my first month's rent back in 1987, she made it clear that Beverly was not quite what she had envisioned for her son. She never said it directly. Women like Rosalind never do. It was in the way she looked at Beverly's hands when she reached for the bread. It was in the small pause she took before answering whenever Beverly spoke. It was in the way she would redirect a conversation, smoothly and without mercy the moment it veered toward anything Beverly had accomplished. Beverly is a registered nurse. She has worked in the cardiac care unit at the same hospital for 8 years. She works night shifts, double shifts, whatever is needed. She is one of the most competent and compassionate people I have ever known. And I am not saying that only because I am her mother. Her colleagues say it, her patients say it, but to Rosalind, none of that seemed to register. Beverly did not have a family business. Beverly did not summer anywhere. Beverly was, in Rosalind's precise and devastating taxonomy, simply not the right fit. Marcus proposed anyway, and I told myself that meant something. I told myself that a man who truly loved my daughter would build a life with her on her terms, not his mother's. The wedding was lovely. We held the reception at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and I danced with Bernard until my feet ached. And Beverly looked so beautiful, I had to keep slipping away to the bathroom so no one would see me cry. Happy tears, mostly. Though even then, watching Rosalind move through the room with her thin smile and her careful eyes, I felt something I could not quite name. Not worry exactly. More like a small stone settling somewhere low in my chest. They moved into a house in Etobicoke. Marcus worked in finance, something with investments. I never fully understood the specifics, and Beverly kept her shifts at the hospital. For the first year, things seemed fine. For the second year, I started to notice that Beverly called me a little less. When she did call, she sounded careful, measured, in a way she had never been with me before. Beverly and I had always been close. She is my only daughter, and after her father's first heart attack 8 years ago, the two of us had grown even closer, the way families do when something reminds them that time is not guaranteed. So I noticed. The careful pauses. I noticed that she stopped talking about Marcus the way a happy wife talks about her husband. She stopped telling me small stories about him, the kind of mundane, affectionate stories that are really just proof that two people are paying attention to each other. I didn't push. I've been a mother long enough to know when to wait. She told me she was pregnant on a Sunday afternoon in February. We were sitting at my kitchen table in Oakville, and the snow was coming down outside, and she slid a little sonogram picture across the table to me and watched my face. I grabbed her hands and I held them, and I didn't let go for a long time. She was 9 weeks along. She looked tired and a little green around the edges from the morning sickness. But underneath all of that, she looked hopeful. That's the word. She looked like someone who had decided to believe that things were going to be all right. I asked her how Marcus had taken the news. She looked at her coffee cup. "He's adjusting," she said. I didn't ask what that meant. I should have. The pregnancy was not easy. Beverly was working reduced hours by the second trimester because of blood pressure issues that her own care team was monitoring closely. Marcus, from what I could piece together, was traveling frequently for work. Calgary, Montreal, a few trips to New York. I drove to Etobicoke twice a week to sit with Beverly. I brought her food. I drove her to appointments when Marcus was away. Rosalind, as far as I knew, called occasionally but did not visit. In Beverly's 7th month, she called me at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night. Her voice was very quiet, the way it gets when she is trying not to cry in front of someone. She said, "Mom, I think something is wrong. Not with the baby, with Marcus." I got in my car. She didn't tell me everything that night. She told me enough. She said that Marcus had become distant in a way that frightened her, that he had started asking questions she didn't understand, questions about her schedule, about who she spoke to at work, about a colleague of hers named James who she had mentioned once, casually, in passing. She said that Rosalind had called her the week before and said something that she couldn't stop thinking about. Rosalind had said very pleasantly, as though commenting on the weather, "You know, Marcus has always had a very strong instinct about people. He can always tell when something isn't right." I sat at Beverly's kitchen table until 2 in the morning. When I finally left, I sat in my car in her driveway for a long time before I could bring myself to start the engine. 3 weeks later, Marcus told Beverly he had spoken to a lawyer. He didn't say why. He just said it, dropped it into a conversation about something else entirely, about whether they needed a new baby monitor, and then watched her face. Beverly told me about it the next day. She was so confused that she couldn't even be frightened yet. She said, "Mom, why would he speak to a lawyer? We're about to have a baby. What is happening?" I didn't have an answer for her. I have been a retired school principal for 6 years now. I spent 30 years managing difficult situations, difficult people, conflict, crisis. I thought I had seen most of what people were capable of, but I did not have an answer for my daughter that day. And I am not sure any answer I could have given would have helped. She went into labor on a Thursday morning in October. I was her support person. Marcus arrived at the hospital about 4 hours after we called him. He sat in the corner of the room with his phone and he watched. And he did not hold her hand. And when the baby finally arrived, this small, furious, perfect boy, Marcus stood up and looked at him for a long moment without saying anything. I was the one who held Beverly's hand. I was the one who told her she had done it. I was the one who said, "Look at him. Look at how beautiful he is." And then Marcus said what he said. "I want a DNA test. I'm not raising someone else's mistake." The nurse who was still in the room looked up sharply. Beverly went completely still. I felt something happen in my chest that I can only describe as a door slamming shut. I said very quietly, "Marcus, this is not the time." He said, "I've already arranged it. I spoke to a doctor here. It can be done before we leave the hospital." Beverly looked at me. Her face was, I don't have the right word for it. She looked like someone standing at the edge of something very high, trying to decide whether the ground below was solid. She said, "Do it then." She said it calmly. She said it with a steadiness that I recognized because I had taught it to her. The way she set her jaw and looked directly at him and said, "Do it then." No tears, no pleading, just that. He looked surprised. I don't think he had expected that. The test was arranged. There is a process for this at hospitals, a formal process with forms and chain of custody and proper collection, and it takes days for results, not hours, despite what television suggests. We went home. Beverly and the baby went to my house in Oakville because she could not bring herself to go back to Etobicoke, and I didn't ask her to. Marcus went somewhere. His parents' place, I assumed. Those days were some of the quietest of my life. Beverly nursed the baby and slept when she could, and we didn't talk about Marcus very much. We talked about the baby. She named him Elliot. He had the most serious expression I had ever seen on a newborn, this deep, furrowed concentration, like he was working through a difficult problem. I told Beverly he looked like her when she was doing a crossword puzzle, and she laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. On the 5th day, the results came back. Beverly's family doctor called her directly. I was sitting at the kitchen table when Beverly took the call in the next room, and I sat very still and listened to the silence, and then to the sound of Beverly's voice, low and even, saying thank you, and then saying yes. She understood, and then nothing for a moment. She came back into the kitchen. She sat down across from me. She put her phone on the table. She said Elliot is his, 100%. I let out a breath I had apparently been holding for 5 days. And then she said, but they flagged something else. I looked at her. She said, when they ran the test, the way they do it, Mom, is they collect samples from the baby and from the alleged father, and they run a full profile. And when they ran Marcus's profile and cross-referenced it with the hospital database, she stopped. She pressed her lips together. Marcus was already in the hospital database from a paternity case 3 years ago, before we were married. I didn't understand at first, and then I did. I said, he has another child. She nodded slowly. A little girl. Her mother had filed a support claim through the courts 2 years ago. He had apparently disputed it, and the case was still ongoing. She looked out the window at the backyard, at the maple tree that had been there since before Beverly was born. His lawyer had been handling it quietly. That's why he spoke to a lawyer, not because of me. He was already dealing with this, and I think he thought that if he could cast doubt on Elliot's paternity, somehow it would help his case. Or maybe he wanted a reason. I sat with that for a long time. The cruelty of it. The particular architecture of what he had done. Standing in that hospital room, 19 hours of her labor behind her, a baby in her arms, and manufacturing a reason to doubt her. It took me a long time to find words for it. Not because I was speechless, but because the words that came to mind were not the kind I have ever allowed myself to say out loud. Beverly contacted a lawyer of her own that week, a family lawyer here in Oakville, a woman named... Well, that doesn't matter. She was excellent. She was exactly what Beverly needed. Marcus called several times. I know because I was there when the calls came in, and I watched Beverly look at the screen and set the phone face down on the table. His mother called once. Beverly answered that one, and I only heard one side of the conversation. But what I heard was Beverly's voice, perfectly level, saying, "Rosalind, I think we both know that this conversation isn't going to change anything. I wish you well." And then she ended the call. I was so proud of her, I could not speak. The divorce took 7 months. In Canada, these things move slowly, and they move slowly for good reason. The courts take their time with custody, with assets, with making sure that people like Elliot have their futures properly secured. Marcus's other situation, the support case, became relevant to the proceedings. His financial picture looked considerably different once everything was on the table. Beverly's lawyer was thorough. Elliot is 14 months old now. He is the size of a small tank and the joy of my entire life. He walks with this particular determined wobble, like he has somewhere extremely important to be, and is irritated that his legs aren't cooperating yet. He laughs at Bernard's terrible jokes. He has his mother's eyes. Beverly is back at work full-time. She moved into a smaller place in Mississauga, close to the hospital, close enough that I can be there in 20 minutes if she needs me. She seems lighter is the word. Lighter than she has seemed in years, actually. I think she spent so long trying to make something work that she didn't notice how much of herself she was spending in the effort. She told me something a few weeks ago that I keep coming back to. We were at my house, and Elliot was asleep in the back room, and we were having tea at the kitchen table the way we have done since she was a teenager. And she said, "You know what the strangest part is, Mom? The whole time, he thought he was exposing me. He thought he was setting a trap, and the only thing that got exposed was him." I wrapped both hands around my mug. The maple tree outside had started to turn orange and gold, and that particular burning red that only happens in Ontario in October. The kind of color that stops you mid-sentence. "I know," I said. She looked at Elliot's little shoes, which were sitting by the back door, and she smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a sad one, just a smile. "Elliot looks like me," she said. "He always did." And he does. He absolutely does. I've been thinking about the maple tree in my backyard a lot lately. Every October it turns that particular burning red, the kind that stops you mid-sentence. And this past autumn I stood at the kitchen window watching it while Elliot slept in the next room, and I thought, things reveal themselves when they're ready. You can't rush it. You can't force it. You just have to still be standing when the season changes. I've lived long enough to know that the people who set out to expose others almost always end up exposed themselves. Not because the universe is tidy, or because there's some invisible hand keeping score. I don't think it works like that. I think it's simpler and harder than that. I think that when a person builds their life on a lie, the lie does the structural work. It holds things up until it doesn't, and when it goes, everything built on top of it goes with it. Marcus didn't fall because of fate. He fell because of the choices he had been making, quietly and carefully, for years before Beverly ever walked into his life. The DNA test he demanded, the one he intended as a weapon, simply turned a light on in a room he thought no one would ever enter. What I keep coming back to is Beverly's face when she said, "Do it then." 19 hours of labor behind her, a newborn in her arms. And she looked at her husband, and she did not beg, did not collapse, did not perform the guilt he was looking for. That kind of steadiness doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from knowing who you are clearly enough that someone else's accusations simply cannot find purchase. That's the thing about integrity. Real integrity. The kind that isn't performed for anyone. It doesn't need defending. It just stands there. And eventually the people who challenged it have to reckon with that. I'm not going to pretend those weeks were easy. They weren't. Beverly was exhausted and heartbroken and had a newborn and a marriage disintegrating all at once. There were nights I sat in the dark after she'd gone to sleep and I felt something I can only describe as grief. Not just for what she was losing, but for what she had never quite had in the first place. That matters too. The mourning of a thing that was never real is its own particular kind of loss. But Beverly did what I have always hoped she would do when things became hard. She thought clearly. She found a good lawyer. She asked the right questions. She protected Elliot. She did not let her pain make decisions for her. There's a kind of intelligence that only shows up under pressure. Not the kind that scores well on tests, but the kind that keeps you upright when everything is pulling you down and asks you to think before you act. I watched my daughter use that intelligence every day through those 7 months, and I was, and I remain, in honest awe of her. Elliot is 14 months old. He wobbles when he walks and he laughs at his grandfather's terrible jokes, and he has absolutely no idea what it costs to bring him safely into a good life. He doesn't need to know. That's the whole point. The people who love him carried that weight so he wouldn't have to, and someday, maybe, he'll do the same for someone he loves. That's how it's supposed to go, I think. That's the whole long project of it.